Hello all, welcome back to another Unreal Engine 5 tutorial. Today we are going to be covering some awesome concepts that should be at the core of your blueprints. We are going to cover topics like loops, spawning objects, testing values, setting values, playing animations, and so much more. Without further ado, let's jump in. So in today's tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to create a blueprint that will spawn a series of objects. It will test the values of those objects, and then it will say whether or not A is greater than B and play an animation on that blueprint. Might sound simple, but we're going to cover a lot of really important techniques, so let's dive into the blueprint. All right, I'll press Control Space on my keyboard to bring up my content drawer. I will right click, create a basic asset of blueprint class type actor. I will call this BP underscore object counter comparison. I'll double click to open this up, and I will create a series of components. I will add first of type scene. This is really just an object that describes a transform in space. So I will call this side underscore A. I will press Control D to duplicate. I'll call this side underscore B. I will add a text render component. And I'm going to make sure to drag this onto my default scene root so it's not attached to that object. And then I will add a skeletal mesh component. And I will call this character underscore A. I will press Control D to duplicate this, and I will call this character underscore B. So these are the 5 components that I'll need, and now I'll set the transform values of these. So before I do that, just so we can see it in space, I'll select both my A and B characters. So I selected one and then used my Control key to select the other. Where it says skeletal mesh asset on the right, I will type, actually it's right here, my skeletal mesh Manny, so I'll use him. And then where it says use animation blueprint, I'll use the ABP underscore Manny. So this was the animation set he's going to use in his animation state machine. I'm going to grab my side A, and I will set the location to negative 150 on the X. So I've selected both of these and set their transform. I will select side B and character B. I will set these to 150. And then I will grab both of these, and in the Y, I will set these to 100. I'm going to grab my text. I'm going to rotate it this way, 90 degrees. On the right over here in the details panel, I'll make it center aligned in both the vertical and the horizontal. And then I will move it up and forward. Now let's compile this and save. All right, now let's go into our event graph. In my event graph, on event begin play, what I will first do is I will grab my text render actor and say set visibility to false. What we will do is when the comparison is made between the two sides, we will make it visible, but until then, we want it off. So I will right click and say custom event, and I will call this start block add timer. I'm going to delete both of these. And on event begin play, I will immediately start block add timer, which we'll call this function down here. I will select this, press the C on my keyboard, and I will say event begin play. So we'll make sure to comment this out as we go to keep this neat and tidy. So let's add 2 variables. I will add an integer value, which will be called block count A. I'll set this to type integer. We'll press Control D on my keyboard to duplicate this. We'll call this block count B. I will duplicate this one more time. and call this max block count. And now let's set these values. So I'll grab my max block count. I'll say get by dragging it off. I will say set block count A and set block count B. I'll pull off max block count and say set, random integer in range. And I will control left click this to drag it here. I will change the minimum value to 1. And then from start block count timer, I'll drag in there. Random integer into A, and also random integer into B. Don't worry, it will run this function again each time, so it is not guaranteed to be the same number, but it will choose a random value from 1 to what we set, which let's set it to 10. So it'll pick a random value from 1 to 10 and set it into those variables. Drag off here, say set timer by event. I'll drag off here and say create event. First, I'm going to promote this to a variable so we can cache this timer. So I'll say loop timer. And then we will create a new event. And we'll drop down here and say create a matching event. And we will call this add blocks on timer. So basically we have set our values, and we'll say set values and start timer. And then on a timer with the duration we set here, which we'll say 0.25, every 0.25 seconds that there's still a block, it will, as long as we say looping set to true, which we'll click here, it will execute this function. All right, so now let's do the part where we add the blocks into space. So I'll drag off here, and I will say do n, which for some reason is always kind of hard to find, but it's right here. Or if you press N on your keyboard and left click, it'll pop up. And so here's what we're going to do. So we're going to drag our block count A and block count B off. I'm going to create a new variable, and we'll say this is called currently testing A. This is going to be a Boolean. Drag this off. I'll pull off here and say select int. I'm going to drag B into here. I'm going to drag this into here. Basically, if we are currently testing A, it's going to say pick A, so it's going to send in this A value, and it's going to pass it through here. If this is false, it'll use B, and it'll pass it through here. So here's where we're going to create a function that's going to do some of this work for us. So I'm going to, the end goal is to add a static mesh component. But where do we do that? So this is where we're going to create our stack of blocks. What we're going to do is we're going to take our counter, and we're going to subtract 1. We are going to multiply this by 100, because 100 units is the standard height of an Unreal Engine cube. And we're going to say add. But before we do that, what we'll do is we'll take our side A of this component. We'll say get world location. We will break this vector. And then we're going to add this to this. And then we're going to say make vector. We're going to feed the y in here. We're going to feed this here as our new z. And then we're going to drag this vector value into here where it says relative transform. So what this is doing is basically, so for instance, for the first counter, it's going to be 0. So it'll be at the bottom. So we say, but the counter is 1 as it ticks through. So it'll say 1 minus 1 is 0 times 100. And then it will basically get the value of this and add 0 to it. On the next time around, it's going to add 100 because it's 100 minus 1. Or 1, it is 1. The next one is 2 minus 1 times 100. And then we're adding it. So basically, it's just, this is the, you'll see it in action, but this is the math of how we stack it up. Basically, we keep adding it as the counter keeps ticking up. Here, we want to set static mesh, and we'll type cube. And I like this chamfer cube. And then what we're going to do now is we'll take this and we'll say add to array. So this one right here. And what we'll do is we'll drag off here. We'll promote this to a variable and call this mesh array underscore A. I'll control D this and say mesh array underscore B. And so we're going to use selects to get some of this work done. So what I'll do is I'm going to drag this all the way over here. And I will select all of this until just before the do n. I'll right click and say collapse to function. And let's call this add block to stack. So we're going to use a series of selects to get our values. And so I'll drag my mesh array B over here, and I'll grab my side A. I'll grab my side B. I'll say select and use this one right here. And I'm going to change this index to a Boolean. And make sure that you don't get these mixed up. So you see how I want this, if I'm saying currently testing A, I want A to be the true one. So make sure that you don't mess this up here. And I'll drag off here and say select. It's going to do that same thing again. Make sure you put the correct option. So for us, we want A in the true and B in the false. I'll drag this in here. Currently testing A is going to be my index. And I will double click in here. So what I've actually done is I need the side to be on a select as well. So I'll drag where it says target onto my function, which will add a pin. You can also add a pin here. Let's add some names for these. I'm going to call this counter. Target array is fine. And then I'll call this side component. This is just the scene component for the side that I'm choosing. So I'll delete this. And then I'll feed this into here. And I will orient these in order. Select these. And that is good for that.